Chapter 7. Avoid Perfectionism. This is the only chapter of the book focused on a negative, or a don't, rather than a do. This is for good reason, as perfectionism is one of the biggest hindrances to output across all artistic fields. The worst part is that it is mostly an imagined personal flaw, and people are, in my experience, unnecessarily avoidant of publication. Perfection is impossible. Let's tackle the most important point I can make about perfectionism. You can't be perfect. The things you make can't be perfect either. We live in a fallen world full of imperfect people, and the things we make are also going to be imperfect. All you can do is your very best with the time and resources that are given to you. And, of course, since this is a book about productivity, you cannot have infinite time to complete a project. If that is what you want, you can check out my other book, Keys to Leaving Things Unfinished Upon Your Death. I'm not sure when it will be published, but rest assured, when I finally release it, it will be perfect. You might doubt me and my snark. You might point to some piece of art that you consider perfect. If you were to actually ask the artist about it, which you sometimes can if they are still alive and reachable, chances are they will say that they are happy with it, but won't ever admit to perfection. There's always something that could be done better. As a performer, I have played live hundreds of times, perhaps thousands. I've never had a perfect performance in all the years I've spent with my instrument. I've asked some of my favorite performers, some with orders of magnitude more experience than me, and I get the same response. There are good performances, even best performances, but no perfect performances. Even if I play every note perfectly for an entire set, there is always something I know that I could have done better. I could have used better phrasing somewhere. I was slightly off of the right tempo for one piece. I didn't perform a crescendo as well as it could be done, or I played with too muddy a tone during a quiet section. There is always something. In one way, this is good, because there is always growth that can happen. In another way, it's maddening, because you are questing for something which cannot be reached. What's important to focus on is that the process, the journey, is more important than the arrival point, which cannot be reached. You should seek perfection, but know that due to our limited time alive, and our limited capacity as mortal beings, you cannot achieve it. The pursuit of the good is the good, to put it another way. Keep in mind that there are aesthetic systems which not only accept imperfection, but view it as something that contributes to the beauty. Wabi-sabi, which is one traditional Japanese aesthetic, views imperfection in presentation as reflecting the nature of existence, in that it is both imperfect and impermanent. Contained within the aesthetic is deep meaning, that we are here a limited time, nothing can be truly said to be finished, and therefore nothing can be truly said to be perfect. Imperfections make things unique and interesting. The art reflects the realities of life. A Western expression of this focused on transience can, I believe, be found in jazz. Improvisation is the primary defining characteristic of all forms of jazz, which expresses the moment rather than being thoroughly composed ahead of time. You gain something from the experience of music being created and fading away within the present by giving up the attempt at the perfection that comes from strict composition. The point of improvisation is the true expression of the music, not so much a perfect selection of notes. Otherwise, you would carefully write your melodies ahead of time. This is evidenced in the recordings of the masters. There are many missed notes on those old tapes and records, now immortalized. It is no coincidence that Autumn Leaves, a song about transience, is such a popular standard. You can make excellent art. You cannot make perfect art. Embrace this reality. Are you really a perfectionist? This might offend you, but chances are that you are not really a perfectionist. You are, in all likelihood, similar to most people in that you fear having your work be negatively criticized. This is natural and is part of being human. Negativity has a bigger impact than positivity, something that goes back to our roots as tribal peoples. In a small tribe, one person hating you can mean your death. The internet artificially amplifies negativity, removing it from the constraints of a social group that mitigates or suppresses negative interpersonal feelings. Having somebody give you a 1-star review on the internet can make you feel the same feelings as if somebody in your tribe hates your contribution to the tribe. But this is illusory. There are more opportunities than ever to publish your work and attract an audience, but due to the two-way nature of social media, it is also harder than ever before to avoid negative criticism. Somebody somewhere is not going to like you. Somebody somewhere is not going to like your art. The more successful you are, the more people will not like you. You need to overcome the fear of negative criticism and let people view your art. Working infinitely on revisions will not net you perfection. In fact, you will be avoiding the very process you need to be subjected to so that you can get closer to perfection. When I have a reader say that they liked one thing but not another in one of my books, I pay attention. I don't rewrite the book, but I do take note of what had a good effect and what went against my intent for the next project. You continue with your successes and you try to improve on your shortcomings. If nobody sees your product, you won't know for sure what you did well and what you didn't. Another truth I have noticed is that, aside from the most hateful people who can't be satisfied anyway, audiences overwhelmingly focus on the positive aspects of a work and forgive its shortcomings, even if they point them out. I've talked to people who love The Phantom Menace and say it's one of their favorite movies, while at the same time saying they dislike Jar Jar Binks. It's the things you do very well that will make the biggest impact, not lack of flaws. Spend a little time putting out art into the world and you will find this out for yourself. Every time you try to do something original and interesting, you are taking a gamble that people will hate it. The only real way to avoid flaws is to make something so boring that nobody would notice it, like a perfect steel cylinder. Put a perfect steel cylinder in the middle of a gallery of art, even modern art, and many people will assume it is just a trash can and not give it a second glance. Modern art is ugly, but at least it isn't boring. What is a real perfectionist, anyway? I define a perfectionist as a person who will refuse to accept a product that does not match his vision of said product perfectly. There are definitely artists and writers who fit this description. One example that comes to mind is Jari Mäenpää of the Finnish metal band Wintersun. He waited years to release a promised album called Time, then put out only half of the record and refused to release the other half. The reason? He didn't have the resources to make the recording match his vision of it. If you listen to Time 1, which was released in 2012, you can probably see why. It's a bombastic work of extreme heavy metal, crossing well outside the normal confines of the genre and using layers and layers of non-standard synths and instruments. It's a great recording, truly one of the best I have heard, but that didn't stop Jari from remixing the album and re-releasing it digitally as Time 1.5. I actually think the remix is worse than the original, but that only serves to illustrate an important point. The perfection of your vision is not necessarily going to mean perfect acceptance or love from others. Your perfect product can still get a 1-star review. I don't think Jari cares that much about reviews. I truly think he cares about his album matching his grandiose vision. If Jari had instead released the complete album, however imperfect when matched to what is going on in his head, I think his band would be in a much better position than where it is now, at least as far as notoriety and financial success go. I realize I am talking about a Finnish metal band here, and chances are you know nothing of them. They could have used the lessons from that project to improve the next one. What they ended up doing was crowdfunding a studio by selling yet another album so that Jari could finally produce Time 2 the way it needs to be produced to match his vision. How many more albums could have been released in the last 15 years had Jari been able to get over his perfectionist nature, or else had been subject to deadlines that would have limited his ability to put off releasing his albums? Consider this with yourself. Would you rather have one perfect book released, or 10 imperfect books and an actual career as a writer, knowing that your perfect book will not actually be perfect and also still get 1-star reviews? I strongly encourage you to be prolific rather than perfect. Upping your output will get you closer to perfect than endless revision of a single work. The obsession with revision. I'll let a recent YouTube comment introduce this concept for me. Just as an aside, I have nothing against this person. He just represents this perspective rather well. Editing and revisions are the most important things you need to face. Any writer who thinks their stuff is good after the first draft is a delusional idiot and their stuff sucks. Editing, cutting out as much crap as you can after you've written it, is a painful and necessary thing. It's something every writer has to sit down and do with an almost callous seriousness. Their story will be better for it. And revisions, many revisions, are required to truly make a story good. You are the master of the future and past. You can play revisionist history as much as you need to make yourself seem like a brilliant writer who had all the steps planned out. So do that. Go back and iron out all the wrinkles and plant all the seeds that will come to beautiful fruition. Don't think that the work you just hammered out is even worth showing to another human being. If you can be bothered to polish it at all, then it isn't worth anyone's time to read. Writers who refuse to edit and don't think that their story needs any revisions are the worst writers of the most lazy, sloppy, pathetic, festering drivel, and writers who mindlessly rely on autocorrect/spell checker and never bother to look up word definitions and synonyms are also pathetic and awful. It's either the arrogance, ignorance, or laziness, but the notions/beliefs/habits are possessed by the worst and most stubborn writers. I haven't altered anything in the YouTube comment. Let's focus on the prime idea of this message and just keep any emotional reaction in the back of our minds. I've talked to many professional level writers over the last few years and listened to many more talk honestly about processes, and the only ones to do revisions on such a scale are screenwriters, and even they have their limits. That's mostly due to the way studios work from script through production, with many eyes making many demands on a final story. This is very unlike other writing mediums where the revision process is 1 to 2 steps, or possibly none at all. Most authors prefer to do as little work in the revision phase of a book as possible, myself included. My last book contained only a few corrections in the revision phase, and about half the typos were found by readers in the first few days of release. Yes, I ship with typos, but so do big publishers, so I usually give myself a pass if I miss only a few. Despite this, it has a 5-star rating on Amazon. It could be that my readers really like me, which I hope they do, or it could be that, considering it was my 11th published book, I knew what I was doing and got the story right on the first try. Robert Heinlein's Rules for Writers had rule number 3 as, "You must refrain from rewriting except to editorial order." He didn't create this idly. The belief that you can rewrite to perfection is both misguided and a waste of time. Editorial order makes the rewrite clear. This is what needs to change. It's easy and defined, whereas author-directed editing is often a morass of self-doubt and guesswork on the effect of the story. I've personally found, mostly with screenplays, that after the second or third draft the product not only stops improving, it gets noticeably worse because it begins to stray further away from the core set of ideas and feelings that created the work to begin with. This is true even with external editorial input guiding the process. Eventually, your revisions will start to restore earlier versions, and then you know you were on a fool's errand. I have also had talks with other writers as to where this belief in extreme revision comes from. The common answers are readers and amateurs. Readers like the idea of a project being a work of extreme passion that the writer spends long, torturous hours to create. Extreme revision is part of this vision of the author and his product as being something special, even superior to normal humanity. They like the idea of the hard-working perfectionist artist. The reality is that writing is a craft, and the more experienced you are with it, the better, and more quickly, you can do it, like with most things. Amateurs tend to think extreme revision is necessary for a work to be good because, honestly, it is necessary for them. When you first try something, you are probably going to be very bad at it. My first screenplay sucks. My first novel sits in a drawer. My second novel required significant rewrites to make presentable, and I only was able to do the right kind of rewrites after I had written and published several other books. For an amateur, their work is always going to fall short of their ideal because they haven't developed the skills necessary to create at their preferred level. This is why I recommend most authors put their first manuscript away after finishing it and go celebrate the accomplishment of finishing a book. Then, those authors need to start the next book. That first work will take a lot of revision, but knowing what to revise will probably require the author to grow and have more experience. A shortcut would be to hire a competent editor to tell you exactly what is not working from a reader's perspective and offer fixes, but this is expensive and not usually an option for a true beginner. It's best to learn and grow first, then get that professional help when you are ready to invest in your product. It also improves the feedback and allows the editor to focus on what needs to change, rather than putting him or her in the role of teacher. Amateurs as readers tend to like the idea of the slaving artist, who toils at his craft because it makes them think that they could be great artists, too. They can be, of course, but not by endlessly revising their first book, but instead by being prolific. The more stories you write, the better you will get at them, so the idea of a contest between a few perfect works and many imperfect works doesn't make sense. The more pieces you put out, the closer each one gets to perfect, because you are a better artist each time. Consider that strong emotion in the YouTube comment. People can get very psychically attached to their ideas about how things in art ought to be. If you suggest to somebody that a great product can be made outside of their imagined ideal, they get defensive and lash out. In some cases, it's a form of reactionary envy. If this person doesn't do it this way, then their product must suck. They must be lying when they say that they didn't do this. He can't just be better than me. He can't be that good. It must be the editing that saved it. That last one is frequently said to me regarding the first Star Wars movie. The idea that Star Wars would have sucked had George Lucas not had competent editing from his wife at the time. She was only one of the editors, by the way. I see these sorts of emotions all the time, and I never have them. I know there are lots of ways to create a work of art, and I judge the final product, not the process absent from the product. If I pay attention to the process, it is only because of what the output is. I also know different people work in different ways. Some writers like to spend more time in revision and draft quickly, avoiding planning. I draft much more slowly, but because of my careful planning, there is usually less for me to do in the revision phase. Artists should focus on what works for their own process. These are guidelines, not laws. Artists should also focus on actually putting their work out. The false dichotomy of quality and quantity. How many times have you seen a fellow artist say that they prefer quality over quantity? There's no actual competition between these two. In the professional world, you need to produce high quantities of work and have it be high quality at the same time. People who frame it as a dichotomy are making an excuse for not being productive and expressing their desire for absolution. If I take a lot of time to finish this project, it's because I'm making it better, is a kind of self-bargaining to resolve inner dissonance. You should avoid this kind of self-talk, as it will reinforce your feelings of inadequacy over the long term. Your work will not be universally loved. How crushing will it be to get a 1-star review on your book after you took years writing your story? It's probably going to happen. Will you take twice as long to write your next book, hoping to avoid another crushing review? What happens when you still get a 1-star review even though you took your time to an even greater degree? You need to accept that some people not liking your work doesn't mean that it is low quality. The positive reviews should be where your focus is. Hone your process so that you are better at making the stories you are good at. The same thing goes for other media. Some people are going to hate your style. No amount of waffling over the details will make them love it. Also, to my point, you may notice that the great artists of both today and yesterday were not only very prolific, but also produced a large body of high-quality work. The example has already been set. You need merely rise to meet it. Generally, output has been the key to mastery. Every completed piece is a step toward greatness. You can't take those steps if you can't work on something, finish it, and let it go.